My name is Maria Koinova. I'm a reader in International Relations at Warwick University Politics and International Studies Department. I'm here to speak with you about a special issue which I recently co-published with my collaborator Gerasimos Tsourapas from the University of Birmingham in the International Political Science Review. This special issue is entitled The Politics of Sending States, Migrants and Diasporas. It builds on a conversation which has existed in the past 7 to 10 years about the role of sending states and how do they engage their diasporas and migrants abroad extraterritorially. This is a novel discussion in the sense that a lot of politics of diasporas has been thought of initially about states that are doing something with regard to their immigration. And yet, sending states have been seeking their diasporas for a variety of reasons, as we show in this special issue. In the first place, they have been looking for diasporas in very utilitarian ways, seeking them for financial investments, for remittances, and other financial contributions, which we think about as certain sorts of material power. They have been looking also into diasporas with regard to cultural aspects of engagement, so that diasporas are not losing their identities in foreign lands, and thereby developing different programs, curricula, cultural activities, engaging in diaspora days and others. So we see this identity-based dynamic that is at play there. And the third strand of ways of diasporas being engaged is by way of larger aspects of governance. Governance which is not simply happening by way of institutions of the state, but by way of networks, by way of larger processes, which in certain ways might be connected to a neoliberal order, and by way of that to aspects of governmentality. What the current scholarly conversation is missing is to unpack the state, and this is what is at the central focus of this special issue. How do sending states are being unpacked? Because it is not simply that diasporas are engaged by way of governments, or even if they are engaged by governments, one institution in the government may have a different approach to the diaspora than another, and especially if this is happening in weak states where capacities of institutions are limited. Within the sending state, also a number of actors which are different from the governments can have their own approaches towards diasporas. Civil society, parties in opposition and parties in government may have different approaches to the diasporas, as well as different non-state actors, again, especially if the states are weak in which these diaspora mobilizations happen. In that sense, this special issue is bringing several novel ways in which to think about theoretically. One is to consider sovereignty and weak statehood as important for how diaspora mobilizations will take place, because local actors, be they governments, be they civil society or parties, are influenced by the way borders are drawn in that state, or whether the state has weak institutions or is a deeply divided society. That really matters, and one needs to consider it in further intellectual endeavors. And the second aspect is to think about political regimes. Whether a sending state is a democratic one, recently democratized like in Eastern Europe, or is quite autocratic like Egypt, affects about how the state will engage the diaspora and who will be the actors who will be prone to reach out to the diaspora, and who of the actors might be suppressed to do so. The final conversation is about the role of nationalism and how it shapes sending states and the different actors within them to engage diasporas abroad. Since many of the cases refer to Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe, We see the role of nationalism, which has been very important in these places, play an important role. With Kosovo, Serbia, and Croatia, it is very clear that sending states are engaging diasporas quite often on a very clearly nationalist principle, while in the larger Eastern European space, there might be more variety, and especially when it comes to engaging diasporas within Europe, they may be engaged on nationalist or on a more civic principle. My collaborator Gerasimos Tsourapas is going to bring more detail about each of the specific contributions.
My name is Gerasimos Tsourapas. I am a lecturer in Middle East Politics at the University of Birmingham. The IPSR edited issue contains 6 papers. The first paper, by Patrick Ireland, is called The Limits of Sending State Power. In this paper, Ireland compares the diaspora policies of 2 sending states in the Global South, namely Sri Lanka and the Philippines. Ireland demonstrates that one of these cases, namely the Philippines, has been much more proactive in securing and protecting the rights of overseas migrant female workers than the Sri Lankan case. And he ascribes this to a number of reasons that have to do with state capacity and also the domestic politics of the 2 sending states. The second paper in the IPSR collection is by Myra Waterbury, and it is called Caught Between Nationalism and Transnationalism. In this paper, Waterbury compares and contrasts the migration and diaspora policies of 4 Eastern European cases, namely the states of Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania. What Waterbury demonstrates is that intra-European migration policies of these 4 states is intricately linked to politics of belonging within each of these 4 cases. In particular, Waterbury argues that the diaspora and migration policies of Poland, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria are intimately connected to pre-accession politics taking place domestically within each of these states. The third paper in this collection is by Sarah Garding, and it is termed Weak by Design. In this paper, Sarah Garding compares and contrasts the evolution of diaspora institutions in 2 Eastern European cases, namely Serbia and Croatia, between 1990 and 2015. Sarah Garding is interested in understanding why these institutions were weak by design and arguably demonstrates 2 reasons behind this weakness. First reason has to do with the evolution of these institutions out of symbolic rather than substantive needs. The second reason is related to the domestic politics within Serbia and Croatia, and Sarah Garding demonstrates how these diaspora institutions were heavily influenced by bickering and political functioning taking place within both sending states. 2 papers in this IPSR collection speak rather nicely to each other, for they bring up the important issue of political parties in the diaspora engagement policies of sending states. The first paper is by Katerina Burgess and is entitled States or Parties. In her paper, Burgess compares and contrasts the diaspora engagement policies of 4 states. In 2 states, we have state-led diaspora engagement, namely by Mexico and the Philippines. In 2 other cases, namely the Dominican Republic and Lebanon, we have party-led diaspora outreach. In the first set of cases, namely the Philippines and Mexico, Burgess identifies how state-led diaspora outreach encourages emigrants to transcend political divisions. Yet, that also leads to a decreased electoral turnout. In the second set of cases, namely the Dominican Republic and Lebanon, Katerina Burgess identifies how party-led diaspora outreach has led to higher electoral turnout in the diaspora. Yet at the same time, these party-led diaspora outreach processes have also exacerbated factionalism, sectarianism, and other conflicts in the diaspora. The second paper that speaks to political parties' influence in terms of diaspora policies is by Maria Koinova, and her paper is entitled Endorsers, Challengers, or Builders. In her paper, Maria Koinova looks at the contested sovereignty case of a de facto state, namely that of Kosovo. Maria Koinova compares and contrasts 4 political parties within the Kosovar scene, 2 in opposition and 2 in government. She demonstrates how the political outreach of these parties towards the diaspora is heavily influenced by the 1990s political events, and in particular, the struggle for Kosovar independence. Her argument is twofold. Firstly, with older political parties or better established political parties, their diaspora engagement strategies have a lot to do with political party dynamics and governmental dynamics. On the other hand, parties that are newcomers to the political scene in Kosovo are more likely to either, on the one hand, challenge the state, or, on the other hand, press for Kosovar recognition abroad. The last paper in this collection by myself is termed Labor Immigration and Modalities of Autocratic Sponsorship in the Middle East. In this paper, I examine the case of Egypt and Egyptian migration within the Middle East in order to demonstrate the importance of political regimes in diaspora engagement and mobilization practices. In particular, I examine how the Egyptian ruling regime between 1970 and 2011 used migration and diaspora policies in order to establish, consolidate, and facilitate processes of autocratic sponsorship with several countries in the Arab Gulf.
We would like to thank very much the British International Studies Association, International Studies Association, and European Research Council Starting Grant Diasporas and Contested Sovereignty for support for this special issue, as we conducted workshops in 2015 and 2016 that gathered a large group of people that helped develop a discussion, and part of this discussion has been published in this special issue. This collection will be of interest to International Political Science Review and the readers of international relations more broadly, as it brings interesting dimensions about states, non-state actors, regimes, and sovereignty, which are at the core of the discipline. And yet it could bring also interest to scholars in comparative politics, as all the contributions are having a comparative dimension. In that sense, they are bringing meso-level generalizations for how diasporas and states and migrants function in international politics. Finally, our special issue will speak to the policymakers who would be interested in learning about specific cases and about specific approaches on diaspora mobilization from sending states and different actors within them. And yet they would be potentially informed and become much more aware of the variety of actors they need to engage in their policy making once they formulate policies that are related to diasporas and sending states. And since more and more of these policies are being relevant with regard to the global compact on migration and other processes in international affairs, policymakers would learn a lot from our special issue about the varieties of ways in which diasporas can be engaged in novel ways.